Get started. So hi everybody and welcome to the third in this series of disability benefits workshops with Lupus UK. Today we will be focusing on universal credit with the disability element, or what is formerly known as employment and support allowance. My name is Zulika Lebo. To describe myself for anyone listening, I am a white presenting mixed race woman with lots of curly red hair that's currently on top of my head in like a pineapple sort of situation. I'm wearing a green checkered dress and a black cardigan sort of thing, and I'm in front of an overstacked white bookshelf. I am the founder of Chronic Creatives, a platform dedicated to supporting artists who are chronically ill or disabled, and we have been working with Lupus UK to bring you these workshops over the next couple of weeks. I'm joined today by Louise Galinsky, who is a disability benefits expert, a member of Chronic Creatives, and who will be delivering the talk today. Louise, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone and welcome to my kitchen. It was either that or me sitting on the settee with a dog snoring in my ear. So yes, I'm a white woman. I'm in my late 60s and I have short white hair with some colour in it. I'm wearing glasses and a black top with a flower design on the front. I've been a solicitor for 38 years, and for the last 24 of those years, I've specialised, amongst other things, in disability benefits.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction, Louise. A few housekeeping things before we go into the talk today. There will be a short break in between the presentation and the Q&A, obviously to give everyone a chance to use the bathroom and grab a tea. And we have extended this session to allow for a longer Q&A, and also because ESA is quite a complex subject and Louise wanted to make sure that there was time for everybody to ask a decent amount of questions. On the note of asking questions, if you have a longer question that you would like answered, or if it's something that's quite complex, try to ask it at the start of the Q&A, just so that we have enough time to properly deal with your questions so we don't get cut short. I hope that's all right with everyone. And yeah, we'll get started. I'm just going to bring up the presentation now, if you bear with me a few minutes. Whenever you're ready, Louise.
Okay, so this is about employment, what used to be called employment and support allowance, which is a benefit for people who are unable to work for any one of a number of reasons. It's a very complicated subject. I tried to simplify it as much as possible. So those of you who haven't lost the will to live by the end should get a gold medal. ESA is now partly within universal credit. And so for the purposes of simplicity, I'm only going to deal with income related ESA, which is now called universal credit with the disability element. Next slide, please. This is a table of contents of what we're going to be talking about today. What is the disability element of UC? That's universal credit. Brief history of disability benefits, eligibility, working while you claim, legal points, the rates you could expect to receive, filling in the form, which is probably the most important bit, the assessment, what to do if your application is refused, appeals, the hearing, general tips and resources that you can use. Next slide, please. ESA started in around 2007 as a separate benefit. It was the successor to incapacity benefit. ESA originally had two branches, contributory and non-contributory, and these related to whether or not your claim could be supported by national insurance contributions that you had paid in or not. The focus of this talk is on the non-contributory or income-related branch, which has now become part of the now sole income-related benefit, which is universal credit. There used to be a number of income-related benefits, income support, job seekers allowance, but the government had the brainwave of making it one benefit, universal credit, which I will call UC. You can apply for UC if you have a disability or health condition that affects your ability to work. And very importantly, it covers your ability to do any kind of work, not just the work you have previously done. So if, say, you're trained as a bricklayer, but you're no longer able to do that, you would be expected to look at alternative types of work and retrain if necessary. Next slide, please. UC gives you money to help with living costs if you're unable to work, and support to get you back into work if you're able to. You can apply if you're employed, self-employed, or unemployed. There are two parts to UC: limited capability for work, or LCW, where you're not expected to work, but you are expected to be looking for ways back into work. These include retraining, practicing interview skills, and CV writing. This is called work-related activity. So if you're found to have limited capability for work-related activity, LCWRA, you are not expected to be looking for ways to get you back into work. Next slide, please. For those of you who haven't been before, brief history of disability benefits. Most of us assume the welfare state has always been here. It hasn't. In 1942, a social economist called William Beveridge was asked to find a way to fund a welfare state which included the NHS. This was put into place in 1948, and his recommendation was that adults of working age pay national insurance contributions, and that should fund it. The welfare state was originally envisaged just as a stopgap for people who found themselves temporarily unemployed, temporarily sick, widowed, or of retirement age. But it soon became clear that more than this was needed. And in 1982, the first non-means tested disability benefit was introduced, which is Disability Living Allowance, or DLA. In 2010, the Equality Act gave us a working definition of disability. And in 2013, the universal credit regulations were put into place. Next slide, please. Right, you can apply for UC if you're under state pension age of 67 and you have a disability or health condition that affects how much you can work. If you're between age 65, which was the former state pension age, and 67 and are still on UC, it's unlikely that you'll be reassessed. You can apply whether you're in or out of work, but there are caps on how many hours you can work and how much you can earn and what work you can do. Obviously, this is a benefit for people who are supposed to be not able to work. So if you are in work, it's important that that work has been sanctioned by your doctor. If you've never worked, you need to have national insurance credits for at least 3 years in order to qualify. In some parts of England and Wales, you will still be applying for ESA, as UC hasn't yet been rolled out throughout the country, although the government is working on it. Next slide, please. Income and savings are taken into account when applying for UC, as this is an income-related benefit, and it will affect how much you receive. These factors are income and savings of your partner, if any. If your partner is relatively high earning, that will knock out your eligibility to get the benefit, although you still will get national insurance contributions. Similarly, savings above £16,000 will knock out your ability to get the benefit, but you will still get NI credits. If you have £0 to £16,000 in savings, you'll receive benefit on a sliding scale. Any income you receive from a source other than work, like interest payments or anything, will also count. Also, if you receive a work-related pension, but are under state pension age. For example, if you retired early from a job and receive a work-related pension, that will be taken into account when calculating UC. Next slide, please. The benefits cap is currently £15,410 a year for a single person, or £23,000 a year for a couple in the Greater London area. The cap is £13,400 per year for a single person, or £20,000 per year for a couple elsewhere in England and Wales. The reason this is worth mentioning is because if you're assessed as having LCWRA, you are not subject to the benefits cap. If you are only assessed as having LCW, you will be subject to it. Next slide, please. Working while you claim. This is a bit of a grey area. You can usually work while you're claiming UC if both of the following apply. You work less than 16 hours a week, and you do not earn more than £140 a week. Also, because this is a benefit that's paid supposedly to people who are not able to work, you have to make sure that that work doesn't conflict with the reasons why you're applying for UC. So if it's sanctioned by your doctor, that is very important. So say, for example, you've always worked as a bricklayer, but say you can't do that anymore, but instead of working as a labourer, but say you can't use your arms, well, that will be contradictory to your claim for UC. You can work more than 16 hours a week if the work is either voluntary or what's called supported permitted work, which must be either supervised by someone from a local authority or voluntary organisation who arranges work for disabled people. A lot of people claiming UC do things like work in charity shops on a voluntary basis, just to try and get them back into looking at ways in which they can get off UC and work. Also, if you're part of a treatment programme under medical supervision. As I've said, the work you are doing must not conflict with the reasons you are claiming UC, and you can still earn no more than £140 a week. Next slide, please. ESA is governed by the Universal Credit Regulations 2013. It's a point-based system. The most important parts of the legislation are Schedules 6, 7, 8 and 9, which are most relevant when claiming UC. Schedule 6 is about the points that can be awarded to get LCW. Schedule 7 is about points that can be awarded to get LCWRA. Schedule 8 is about how you can get LCW if you don't achieve the required number of points. And Schedule 9 is about how you can get LCWRA if you do not achieve the required numbers of points. Schedules 8 and 9 deal with people who don't fit into the point system, but who should nevertheless qualify for benefit. These are overwhelmingly people with fluctuating illnesses and people with enduring mental health problems. Next slide, please. The assessment for UC is not about your disability, but about functional capability. Functional capability refers to a person's ability to perform tasks and activities that are necessary in their daily lives without assistance. Your functional capability is assessed on a points-based system. To qualify, you need 15 points. This will give you LCW. To get LCWRA, you first have to qualify for LCW. You will then be assessed again for LCWRA. Next slide, please. If you do not receive enough points for LCW, you can still qualify for benefit under Schedule 8. Similarly, under Schedule 9, if you don't qualify for LCWRA. You can qualify under both schedules if there is a substantial risk to your health or that of others if you are not assessed as having LCW and or LCWRA. Next slide, please. A single person under 25 will receive UC of $342.72 a month plus $341.92 for LCW or LCWRA. A single person over 25 will receive UC of $409.89 a month plus $341.92 for LCW or LCWRA. If you are in a couple and are both under 25, you'll get $488.59 plus $341.92 for LCW or LCWRA for both of you. If you are in a couple and either of you are over 25, you'll get £594 a month plus $341.92 for LCW or LCWRA for both of you. Next slide, please. Filling in the claim form. The claim form is also called a capability questionnaire. It's in two parts, physical activities and mental health activities. The physical activities are mobilizing and stairs. Now, it's worth mentioning in mobilizing that it's specified that mobilizing means mobilizing unaided by another person with or without a walking stick, manual wheelchair or other aid if such aid is normally or could reasonably be worn or used. Now, the criterion is that you can't mobilize more than 50 meters on level ground without stopping to avoid significant discomfort or exhaustion, or within a reasonable timescale because of significant discomfort or exhaustion. So if the finding is that you can't walk 50 meters, but would be able to use a manual wheelchair, you will not get any points. So often people who can't walk are surprised that they're not given points because their assessment considers that they could use a manual wheelchair. So when you're filling in your form, you need to address that point if you can't walk 50 meters. Standing and sitting is about being able to move between standing and sitting. So it's not just sitting for an hour, it's your ability to change your position. Reaching with your arms, picking up and moving objects. It's not a box of bricks. It's everyday objects like a litre of milk or a pint of milk. And the test is whether, say, you could get the milk out of the fridge and put it on a table. You're not going to have to be hauling it home from the shops. Manual dexterity is about using your hands And it's worth mentioning here that you have to have problems with both your hands. If, say, you have arthritis in one hand and have problems with using a telephone or using a computer mouse with that hand, but you can do it with the other hand, you won't get any points. Making yourself understood is about speech, mainly about speech, or about your ability to write or type or other means that you would normally use. So say if you're a deaf person without speech and you would normally type things to be able to make yourself understood. Unless you have problems with doing that, you won't get points. Understanding communication is mostly about deafness, and navigating outdoors is mostly about sight problems with being able to get around. Continence is about ability not to have accidents before you get to the toilet. And it includes whether or not you wear what's called a device, which is something like a colostomy bag. The most frequent points awarded for continence are people who have urgency problems and have difficulties getting to the toilet on time. It's worth mentioning that incontinence and urgency are not the same thing. Incontinence is when you don't know you've been to the toilet, and urgency is when you know you need to go, but you can't get there in time. Consciousness is about literally losing consciousness and mostly deals with epilepsy. There are some form of non-epileptic illnesses where people lose consciousness, but they're not very common. Next slide. These are the mental health activities, although they also cover cognitive problems. So learning tasks. Say, for example, you suffer from significant depression and have difficulty retaining information, you should fill in this part of the form. Or if you have been diagnosed as being in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia and have problems retaining information. Awareness of hazards is about reduced awareness of everyday hazards to the point that you might cause yourself or other people a significant injury. You won't be awarded points for this category if you say let a pot overboil once on the stove. That won't count. It has to be repeated difficulties with being aware of dangers. Initiating and completing personal actions is about ability to literally get things done. Planning, organizing, problem solving, prioritizing or switching tasks. So if, say, you suffer from depression and you start something but never finish it and have difficulty moving on or knowing what needs to be done, then you should fill in this part of the form. Coping with change is about exactly that. And you'll be ask questions like, well, what would you do if you got an appointment with your doctor and they ring up and ask you to change it to another day? A lot of people with depression don't like change. They like things to be exactly how they are. And if they've got an appointment on Wednesday at 2 o'clock and the surgery rings up and wants to bring it forward, that change will cause them a big panic. Getting about is about being able to go outdoors by yourself. So if you have significant difficulty with doing that, fill in this part of the form. Social engagement is about being able to deal with people who are either familiar or unfamiliar to you. So if, say, you're invited to a family picnic but can't face going, then that would mean problems with familiar people. Even more so if you couldn't join your mates for a drink down the pub. Appropriateness of behaviour is about those who are on a short fuse and act out either because of a condition such as post-traumatic stress disorder or depression. Next slide, please. The assessment. Your claim form will be used as part of the assessment. So it's important that the evidence you put in it is consistent with what you tell the assessor. So if, say, you've only filled in that you have problems with physical activities in your form, but then tell the assessor that you're claiming all the mental health activities, they'll want to know why and why you didn't put these down before. Points, if any, are usually assigned at your assessment, but can be added later. The assessment is carried out by a healthcare professional or HCP, who may be anyone from a paramedic to a physiotherapist or doctor. The assessments are being carried out by phone at the moment, although I did read yesterday that they are going to start doing them in person again. How that will operate, I have no idea. It's possible that the HCP who assesses you may not be a specialist in your condition, as they are looking at what you are or are not able to do as a result of your condition, not the condition itself, although obviously the condition may well suggest what you would not be able to do. If you can, take someone with you to the assessment so that if necessary, they can give evidence as to what takes place. This is particularly so where you have a complaint about what the HCP asked you. For example, if all sorts of answers appear in their report which they didn't ask you, the person you take with you may be able to back that up. But it's worth mentioning that the DWP has a separate complaints system for dealing with complaints about the assessors, and that is not part of what the tribunal looks at. Next slide, please. The assessment LCW. The assessor will look at whether you gain any points for any of the categories listed above. You need to achieve 15 points, and this can be by a mixture of physical and or mental health activities. So you might, for example, get 9 points for not being able to stand and sit for more than half an hour, and you may get another 9 points for needing help getting about. Points for each activity are awarded on a sliding scale. The top points for each activity are 15. So if, say, you're unable to get to any place outside your home with which you're familiar without help, you'll get 15 points. So that could apply to somebody who's agoraphobic. Points for each activity are awarded on a sliding scale. So if you're unable to get to a specified place with which you're familiar without being accompanied, that's 9 points. So you can get out of the house, but you still need somebody to be with you. If you're unable to get to a specified place with which you're unfamiliar without being accompanied, that's 6 points. There will usually be a physical examination to determine the extent of your condition, where you claim physical activities, or where, say, for example, you're partially sighted, but have nothing which states your visual acuity, and then the HCP will give you an eye test. Next slide, please. You can only be considered for an activity in LCWRA if you scored 15 points for that activity in LCW, and that activity is one included in LCWRA, because not all of the activities in LCW are included for LCWRA. So, for example, getting about, the one I was just talking about, is not included in LCWRA. So if that is your main problem, getting out of the house, you won't get LCWRA. unless there is another activity for which you score 15 points, or if you go into Schedule 9 and it would cause a significant risk to your mental health if you were found not to be eligible for LCWRA. There are, however, 2 additional activities that only appear in LCWRA and not elsewhere, and they're very rarely awarded. That is needing help to feed yourself and chewing and swallowing food. I have never known these points be awarded, but they are there, and I have heard of people who have had them awarded, but it's very rare. So I'm just going to repeat this because it's not easy. You can only be considered for an activity in LCWRA if you scored 15 points for that activity in LCW, and it's one included in LCWRA. The physical activities not considered for LCWRA are standing and sitting, continence and navigating, and the mental health one is getting about. Next slide, please. Following your assessment, you'll get a letter detailing the decision that's been taken. If you disagree with this decision, you have a month from the date on that letter to apply for a mandatory reconsideration or MR. This step has to be taken before you can appeal. If you ask for an MR, include any new evidence which you may not have previously sent in. So say for the sake of argument, you hadn't had a test of your ability to see by an ophthalmologist before you had your assessment, but now you have one which proves that your vision is extremely low, then that the descriptor of navigating may well be reconsidered. The decision will then be looked at again by a different person, and you will then receive another decision letter. If the decision remains unchanged, which is likely, you will then have 1 month from the date on the MR letter within which to appeal. Next slide, please. You can appeal by letter or by filling in the specific appeal form. You can ask for an appeal in person or for your appeal to be on the papers only. The DWP will then put together an appeal bundle containing your claim form, the assessment report, any extra evidence you sent in, and all the decisions that have been taken. The tribunal is a 2-person panel, which includes a judge and a doctor, and the doctor will not necessarily be a specialist in your condition. Next slide, please. You can take a rep if you have one or a companion to the hearing with you. The judge will introduce themselves and the doctor and will tell you what will happen during the hearing. There may be a representative present from the DWP to state their case. The tribunal will not be aware in advance whether or not they'll be attending. The hearings at the moment are being held remotely by telephone, but will soon be moving on to video. And there are plans to reinstitute face-to-face hearings as soon as that's possible. Both tribunal members will ask you questions about your functional capability. The tribunal is not looking at how you are on the date of the hearing. It looks at how you were at the date the first decision was made. So that might be some time after that date, possibly as long as a year. So you'll be asked to think back to how you were at the date of the decision rather than how you are on the day of your appeal, which is very difficult to do. It's a bit of an artificial construct, but it's the law. Next slide, please. The hearing. You'll be given an opportunity to add anything which may have been left out. Your representative can point out important evidence in the bundle and can also state which points they think apply. Your companion may give evidence, but it's important that they don't prompt you or interrupt when you're giving your evidence. The decision may be given to you on the day if the tribunal has time, or will be sent in the post. Next slide, please. UC tips. Remember to list all your conditions on the claim form. Think carefully about what you are and are not able to do for yourself. I think people who live alone are inevitably penalised because they have to find ways to do things for themselves rather than just having someone else who lives with them do it for them. So do think about the things that you have found ways to do for yourself, but which would be so much easier if someone could help you with them. If you cannot do something, say what specifically about your condition makes it difficult. Don't be tempted to fill in problems with every single activity, even if you don't particularly have problems with it. I call this the scattergun approach, in that, you know, people throw everything at it in the hope that something will stick. But you're far more likely to be believed if you say, I can't do this, but I can do that. Report all your symptoms to your GP so that they're on your medical records. Get help if you need it. Do not underplay your symptoms. Tell it like it is. And remember that the assessment is about your ability to do any job, not just the job you used to do or have been trained for. I'd like to go back to the slide on LCWRA, please. Right, I realise that under the physical activities here, I've put continence when I should have put consciousness. So continence is included in LCWRA, but consciousness, if you have fits or syncope or another condition like that, is not. So I apologise for that. I zigged when I should have zagged. All right, so let's go back to the last slide. This is just a list of organisations that can help you with form filling. Scope can help, so can the CAB, although all of these organisations seem to be offering a reduced service at the moment for obvious reasons. Scope can also help with rewriting your CV. Lupus UK has a range of resources available, including an article on managing your finances. If you have no problems with concentration or you want to be sent to sleep, you can read the Sweet and Maxwell Social Security Legislation handbooks. They're very technical, but they do give a lot of case references and good advice on what or what not is included in the various activities. Child Poverty Action Group Welfare Benefits Handbook is very easy to read, very concise, and is probably the best handbook of its nature. Unfortunately, it is quite expensive. So see first of all if you can get digital access to it. The gov.uk website also has a lot of easy to read information on benefits and eligibility, and the Disability Law Service provides free advice for disabled people. So thank you for listening, and apologies about the mistake, but as far as I'm aware, that's the only one. Okay.
Sorry about that, folks.
What happened there?
My computer just didn't want to come back to Zoom, so it kept going back to the presentation. So apologies about that, folks. Right, so it's now 4:41. I would suggest that we take a 5-minute break, or maybe 7-minute break, 8-minute break, and we come back at 4:50, and then we'll get into the Q&A. How is that for everybody? If you could just give me a little signal in the chat that works for everyone, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's fine.
Louise is in. Ah, yes, you can do the thumbs up. That's great. Yes. Okay, fantastic. So I'll see everybody again at 4:50. Welcome back, everyone. Can you all hear me? Just want to make sure my equipment is still working. Great. Louise, are you there?
Yeah, you need to start the video.
Do I still? Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Oh dear, the wonders of technology.
Yeah.
Isn't it fantastic? Bear with me. You should be able to start your video.
Let me see. It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Yes, I did stop your video. That's interesting. Okay. All right. Let's figure this out. It may be worth, let me try this. Here we go. Louise, it may be worth you exiting and then coming back in.
Okay, I'll try that.
Apologies for the delay, everybody. So yes, as I mentioned earlier, we have an extra 15 minutes for questions and answers. So hopefully that should give us enough time to really bed into this subject. As Louise said, it is quite complicated. Okay, Louise seems to be back with us. Just waiting for her audio to sync up. Louise, can you hear us?
It's still saying that you've stopped my video.
Okay. I think we should continue on and
Yeah.
I'll try to fix the problem while you answer the first question.
Yeah.
So the first question is, I'm currently signed off from work for 3 months. If I can't return to work after the 3 months, am I eligible to apply for ESA? And how long am I eligible to claim ESA?
How long are you eligible to claim it? Well, that depends on the assessment. I'm answering the second bit first. I'm aware of that. Hang on. There is a qualifying period for ESA, so you can't claim it immediately. I'm just checking what that is. I don't usually deal with this stuff, so I hadn't thought about that. Well, there is a qualifying period, and I think it's 3 months before and 6 months after. So you wouldn't be able to claim immediately. I'm not aware of any limit on your being able to claim, but once you've had your assessment, say for the sake of argument, you are awarded benefit, the award will specify how long it's for, and then you'll be retested. If you're not awarded benefit, you have to wait 6 months to claim again.
Okay. The person has said to clarify that they have been off work for over a year from work.
Oh, I thought they said they'd been signed off for 3 months. Well, if they've been signed off for over a year, then they would be able to apply. Oh, for a further 3 months. Yes, they would be able to apply.
Okay. Okay. There is. Okay. There are no more questions. Are there any more questions? So far, we only have the one. Louise, you should be able to come on camera now. I think I've fixed the problem.
Yes.
There we go. Fantastic.
Hello. Hello.
So does anyone have any further questions about ESA or about disability benefits in general?
I hope you understood it. It is very complicated and it's hard to simplify it. But the main point is, as with what I was saying last 2 previous weeks about PIP, is to make sure you get your claim form right, because that's the most important thing. Don't claim every activity if you don't have problems with it, and do relate the problems that you have to your conditions.
There were a lot of, is it acronyms? LCW and LCWRA. Yeah. It's quite,
well, yeah, that saves endless repetition of the same things, but it is one of the more difficult benefits, particularly because the government has been trying to streamline it and make universal credit the only income related benefit, which I think is a good idea. But of course, there are all sorts of transitional problems, and contributory ESA is still around. So I didn't want to muddy the waters further by talking about that as well, because that just makes everything even more confusing.
Yes, I understand that. As I say, folks, we do have time for more questions if there are any. I think we can give it a couple of minutes. Any tips if you are interviewed for ESA or the disability element of universal credit?
Right. Well, first of all, just be honest. Don't try and gild the lily, because if, say, you've been assessed as having mild arthritis, but say you can't walk anywhere, you're unlikely to be believed. Do state what treatment you're having. Do list your medication on the claim form. There is a space where you can do this. And if you have a fluctuating condition, try and explain to the assessor how you have problems with that particular condition. Say at least 3 times a week, I find it really difficult to get out of bed because of my arthritis. Now, although there isn't a specific activity for getting out of bed, it will reflect in, say, your ability to do things like standing and sitting. So the activities are more work related, not things like washing and dressing and going to the toilet, or except if you have incontinence. I'm really sorry, there's someone at my door. I'm just going to go and answer it.
These are the amazing wonders of doing Zoom seminars. We'll come to your question when Louise is back. Obviously, can't do it without her. Yeah, I hope that everybody is finding these workshops useful.
After all that, they pressed the wrong bell.
Oh,
so
ridiculous.
Annoying.
Okay, so we have another question in the chat box, which is, if you lose eligibility on a change in financial circumstances, how long then should you have to come back on after a further change? So say for the sake of argument, you earn a bit too much 1 month. How would that affect your benefit?
If you earn too much 1 month, I'm not sure if they would necessarily chuck you off for 1 month. But if you're consistently earning too much or suddenly get a windfall and have too much in savings, then you can reapply after 6 months, but there's no point in reapplying unless you're back to where you were before, because the same thing will just happen again.
Right, okay.
What was the question I was answering when the doorbell went?
Any tips for
About
being interviewed?
Yes. Be honest, don't gild the lily, but do state what you have problems with and why. So say for its sake of argument, you have back problems, which are incredibly common. You can say something like, I've been to see the orthopedic surgeon who told me I could have surgery, but said that I could also end up being paralyzed. So I've chosen not to have surgery. However, what this means is that I'm very slow in the morning. It takes me a long time to get going, and I can't sit or stand for more than 5 minutes. So they will ask you all sorts of questions about what you can and can't do. Now, don't forget that when you go for your assessment, all that they know about you is basically in your claim form. So you need to fill them in with as much information as you can, so that they get a rounded picture of what your problems are. Don't underplay your symptoms. A lot of people with mental health problems do this because they don't want to be tagged with the stigma of being mentally ill. So if you can't concentrate, can't go out by yourself because of anxiety and depression, then tell them. Don't be afraid to tell them everything that's going on. I once saw a man who had severe OCD, and he had to check that the front door was locked 20 times before he could go out. So, you know, do tell them exactly what's going on.
That sounds like an incredibly difficult way to live.
It was. I mean, his life was agony, absolute agony, and he'd been turned down for benefit. And I don't think the assessor had an appreciation because he hadn't filled in his form properly. The assessor didn't have an appreciation of how bad things were, so that when he came to the assessment, they thought he was just making it up.
Okay, so somebody in that position, how could they fill in the form that would lead to a favorable outcome?
Okay, so they'd probably be concentrated on the mental health activities, and so they would cite problems with initiating and completing personal action. Let me just find that one. You can get 15 points if you cannot, due to impaired mental function, reliably initiate or complete at least 2 sequential personal actions. So if you've got really bad OCD and have to keep doing a certain task because it never looks right, and the second you leave it, you've got to do it again, that will come into not able to reliably initiate or complete at least 2 sequential personal actions, and you should get 15 points.
Right, I see. Okay, so
you would need to elaborate in the claim form. It takes me an hour to complete any task at all because of my OCD. If I'm required to then start another task, I can't cope with that, and I have to rest until such time as I'm able to contemplate doing an additional task, for example, you know.
Right, okay, I understand. A question I have about the section on if you're on eligibility, and if your partner's earnings affecting affecting your ability to claim ESA. So is that simply if you live together? If you
Yes, if you live together and your resources are pooled, there is a category called living together as husband and wife. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're married. A lot of people get around this by not living together, but the DWP is not always fooled. And if, say, for example, your neighbours know that your partner stays at your place nearly all the time, they may shop you. So just living separately is not necessarily, does not necessarily prove that your resources are not pooled. So be careful on that one.
Okay. And how much does your partner need to be earning for you to lose eligibility for the benefit?
I don't know offhand. With savings, it's 16 grand, but I don't know offhand how much they need to be earning before you lose eligibility. Anyone earning much over 20,000 a year is going to lose their eligibility.
Right. Okay. Okay. That's it's not a lot to support two people on.
Not a lot to support two people on, but unfortunately, with the minimum wage, that is what a lot of people are doing. But of course, if you are working, you may be able to claim tax credits instead.
Right, understood. Do we have any more questions about ESA or even PIP? I see that somebody's asking, saying that they are currently a carer for their mum, who is a palliative patient, and they're struggling, although they're not working because their mum needs full-time care. Is there anything that they are eligible for themselves?
Does your mum have PIP or attendance allowance? She's on PIP. Right, if she has the daily living component of PIP, which I expect she does, you can then claim carer's allowance. Right, okay, you can claim carer's allowance. If you claim carer's allowance, you're undertaking that you're caring for that person for over 35 hours a week, which I expect you are. So I would immediately put in a claim for that, but unfortunately, that is all that is available.
I've just placed a link in the chat for carer's allowance. I hope that helps.
Now, I see quite a lot of people who have carer's allowance who are also claiming disability benefits for themselves and claiming, for example, that they can't wash and dress themselves when they're doing that for another person. That is what is called an inherent contradiction, and they won't get benefit. However, they may still be able to get benefit if the caring that they're doing is, for example, prompting the other person to do something rather than actually physically doing it for them. So be careful on that one. If someone says, oh, well, you can claim PIP, but if you're already claiming carer's allowance, you can come unstuck.
It's an unfortunate situation that a lot of people with disabilities wind up having to look after a friend or a relative who is possibly more disabled or disabled in a different way than they are.
Yes, if you're, so, I mean, I've seen couples where one has physical disabilities and the other one has mental health problems. And so they each got carer's allowance for each other because one was doing the physical work and the other was doing the prompting work. But that's not usual.
I understand. We have 5 minutes before the end of this session. So we just have time for, I think, one more question before we're due to close up. So if anyone would like to write something in the chat, then that's fine. If not, then I think we can close the session a little bit early. wait on tender hooks with these things. Is somebody going to type in the chat? Okay, everyone. Well, I think then we'll close up. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope that these sessions have been useful. Please remember that the sessions are being recorded, and obviously the Q&A will be edited out, but we will be putting them on the Lupus UK website, and they will be an open resource, so you can come back to them later. Also on Lupus UK, we have made the slides that we've used today available, and you will be able to download them, and they have been made accessible with for screen readers, so there are descriptions on the photographs and everything, so you can also refer back to those as well. Yes, and please give Chronic Creatives a follow on Instagram. We are at Chronic Creatives, and we support artists who are disabled or chronically ill, and artists can be anything from somebody who writes, somebody who does performance, all the full gamut of creativity we support there. So yeah, special thanks to Lupus UK, and thanks to you all again for joining us, and thanks most of all to Louise for giving us her expertise today.
All right, thanks a lot. I hope you found it useful.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Have a good day. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.